and surprisingly, perhaps, people also trying to get back in. British troops continue to besiege Basra, and today they sent in tanks on a symbolic mission to destroy two statues of Saddam Hussein. Iraqi fighters fired back with rocket-propelled grenades and machine guns.
A few hundred or even a couple of thousand people is a minuscule minority, but nevertheless they can put up a decent fight, as we know from Chechnya and Grozny and so on. That sort of guerrilla tactic against armoured vehicles is very effective, and they know their way around the city through the lanes and the nooks and the crannies.
Resistance may be stubborn, but the British 7th Armoured Brigade believe they can wear it down with regular raids into the city. So while British troops here on the outskirts of Basra are still biding their time, they are also carrying out penetrating raids right into the city centre just behind me. The idea is gradually to destroy the Ba'ath Party leadership so that the people of Basra feel free to rise up against the rule of Saddam Hussein.
Fire now!
British troops destroy any Iraqi weapons they find. Like this abandoned tank. But it isn't proving quite so simple to eradicate Saddam Hussein's regime or his armed forces, despite this inferno of war. Ben Brown, BBC News, outside Basra in southern Iraq.
Figures in a landscape. These are Iraqi soldiers who seem to be checking their defenses before the day's bombing starts. It's not long in coming. The Iraqi front line here is taking a real hammering now.
Okay.
And so the Iraqis are pulling back from position after position. The Kurds are moving forward to take over from them, reaching deep into what was Iraqi territory without firing a shot. We arrived just as they were setting their mark on their new positions. They checked out the equipment the Iraqis had hurriedly abandoned. Again, the worrying realization that they seem to be preparing for chemical warfare. The first job was to clear out the Iraqi mines. They dug out dozens of them, and they treat them with cheerful carelessness.
Not from Iraqi soldiers or even paramilitaries, but a terrorist with a car bomb.
The driver beckoned them a little bit closer, and as the soldiers approached, by fighting vehicles, the driver detonated a bomb, killing himself and the 4 soldiers.
The Iraqi government quickly pronounced the bomber a martyr and promised more Iraqis will follow in his footsteps.
That kind of an activity, I think, is something that's a symbol of an organization that's beginning to get a little bit desperate.
Even before the suicide attack, the 3rd Infantry, like many forward forces, had been in a holding pattern, waiting for airstrikes to degrade Iraqi army positions before they continue advancing north. To that end, 36 Apache helicopters from the 101st Airborne went after the Medina Division of the Republican Guard near Karbala.
We believe it was a very successful attack. A number of tanks, armored personnel carriers, artillery pieces, multi-purpose vehicles, and some surface-to-air missile, mobile surface-to-air missile radars were destroyed in that attack.
Central Command released video of 2 more successful attacks. In this one, F-15s destroyed the Ba'ath Party headquarters in Basra and the 200 paramilitaries believed to be meeting inside. And under cover of the night, Army Rangers raided an Iraqi outpost in the western desert, capturing more than 50 Iraqi commandos and seizing a cache of arms and ammo. Baghdad is being hit hard again tonight, but people...
Explosion occurred, and we just saw a very loud bang. These pictures coming to us live from Al Jazeera, the Arabic network, Arabic language network.
سحابة كثيفة من الدخان الأسود تتصاعد من خلف البناء الذي يبدو في الصورة. لا نستطيع أن نرى الهدف بوضوح لكنه.
There have been a series of explosions in the last few minutes. These pictures were in fact recorded earlier. They're coming to us from the Al Jazeera network. As we saw that huge blast, just one of many that have rocked the Iraqi capital, especially intensive over the last 24 hours. mainly in the center as well as the outskirts of the city, as well as this air campaign appears to be picking up momentum. Once again, live pictures from Baghdad. The smoke appears to be very, very dense and thick. But for now, we will move on to the...
British tanks and American special forces provided security in Azubar, a city on the outskirts of Basra, for 2 trucks that carried 2,000 humanitarian daily rations, which carry beans, cake, rice, jam, and other items, and additional large rations that can feed up to 500 more people. In addition, there were 3,000 bottles of water. The Army calls this targeted humanitarian assistance. The purpose is not to feed an entire city. Only large non-governmental organizations or charities are capable of that. Instead, the coalition hopes the aid wins over neutral Iraqis to the coalition side in this battle for Basra. The U.S. Special Forces Civil Affairs Team, Charlie Company of the 96th Battalion of U.S. Special Operations Forces, is led by a man who identifies himself as Major DJ. Special operators do not use their last name.
Well, hopefully we gave the local leader an element to provide his people a little hope. We told him this will not be the last time we do this, but he's got to cooperate, and his people have to cooperate, or it becomes a very hazardous situation for everyone.
Military planners believe the battle to wrest control of Basra from Iraqi paramilitary forces could be won more easily if Basra's Shiite Muslims, traditionally Saddam Hussein opponents, actively supported the coalition forces. So far, they have not. Winning them over is made more difficult by events 12 years ago. A Shiite revolt against Saddam Hussein after the first Gulf War was harshly put down after the U.S. decided not to support it. This time, Iraq Shiites appear to be taking a wait-and-see attitude. Mike Betcher, CNN, embedded with Special Operations Forces on the outskirts of Basra.
العاصمة العراقية بغداد، حيث نشاهد معكم هذه السحب الدخانية التي تعلو سماء العاصمة بغداد. تيسير، هل أنت معي؟
نعم معك خديجة.
That was the scene in Baghdad just a few minutes ago as once again coalition aircraft strike the capital. Once again, this is the live picture coming to us from Baghdad. As that smoke continues to rise, it's been rising now for 10 minutes or so, possibly more.
Information, you'll see that blue map on the wall. That is in a room, a press conference room on the first floor of the Ministry of Information. Every day during the war so far, the Information Minister has briefed journalists from an annex to the Ministry of Information. Perhaps a note of defiance here, given that the Information Ministry was struck, causing some damage just the night before, John.
Want to distort the fact and saying that they are military people disguised in civilian clothes, and that's completely untrue.
Don't try this at home. Kuwaiti firefighters prepare for a second assault on this. And it's hot enough to melt your teeth. 20,000 barrels of top-grade oil a day roaring into the atmosphere. The next to last well fire left in Iraq's vast Rumaila oil field. Over here, the red-suited Texans from Boots and Coots are about to finish off a well they extinguished a couple of hours before.
They call us firefighters, but really we're oil stoppers. We have to get the genie back in the bottle.
But that, too, will be only a start. After 3 wars, international sanctions, and a generation of neglect, this oil field, like much else in Iraq, is in sad shape.
It is rusted. There's lack of maintenance of any sorts. I was very surprised that they were even working.
First, there are mines, booby traps, and munitions to deal with to clear Rumaila's 1,100 wells. Then, restoring and upgrading will be a long, multi-billion-dollar job. But assuming the coalition reaches its goals, however long it takes, Iraqi oil will likely transform the world economy and yours. Here's why. This well is just a little squirt. Iraq has more than 3 times as much oil as the United States, and peacetime exploration may make that 10 times as much. Maybe more than the oil emperor, Saudi Arabia. It's light and sweet, and it wants to leap out of the ground. 1 barrel costs only $5 to produce, a third or less of what it costs many other countries. Would you like to invest here? We asked the man in charge.
Yeah, if I had to invest, I would certainly be investing in this country. And matter of fact, I think in a way I am.
Right now, oil sells for around $30 a barrel. Whenever the day comes, Iraq will be able to sell it for $20 or less and still make a tidy profit. $20 a barrel oil could knock 20% off the cost of gasoline. Recession could be slowly put in its place.
Whether you're for the war or against it, whether the fighting goes smoothly or not, one day the oil fields of Iraq are going to make a difference in how much you pay to fill up your car. Richard Blystone, CNN, Rumaila Oil Field, Southern.
Looks like a basic soldier's uniform.
The telltale signs of a vanished army.
There's a gas mask container
that could offer clues of a new kind of threat to U.S. military operations in Iraq.
These here look like old radio packs.
All around this newly established U.S. Marine position in central Iraq lays evidence of the Iraqi forces that were here before, who appear to have fled at the first sign of U.S. troops.
This could be just a small indication of how quickly they left. A teapot down here, with the tea still inside.
Master Sergeant Henry Bergeron walks me through the scene like a detective on the case. Boxes, helmets, canteens, and other gear all cast aside. But to the Master Sergeant, it's the abandoned uniforms that say the most.
Looks like they took off all the military uniforms, left them in place, helmets in place, boots in place, probably changing civilian attire to blend in with the local population.
On the ride north, the Master Sergeant and other Marines remember seeing men beside the road in civilian clothes and bare feet. These clues point to an army that didn't fight or surrender, but simply walked away. Clothing isn't the only thing abandoned. There are also weapons and plenty of ammunition, some of it brand new, still in wrappers.
Here's something else that got left behind, this motorcycle. You see a number of them around here. It might look innocent enough, if it weren't for the machine gun mount.
Marine commanders theorize the soldiers who were here have either voluntarily or been forced to join guerrilla units now attacking U.S. military positions. A paramilitary force that is difficult to find and fight, and that's diverting American assets from fighting a war to protecting long supply lines. The caches of weapons are simple to get rid of. But dealing with this new kind of Iraqi opposition that appears to have sprung from a former army may not be as easy. Martin Savage, CNN, with the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines in central Iraq.
See the Ministry of Information on the right-hand side of the picture, so it appears another night where the bombing has struck very close to the Ministry of Information. Some apartment buildings there just behind the Ministry of Information on the right-hand side. The picture you see, that large square building, that's the Ministry of Information. Where the cloud of smoke is coming up from, that is a series of apartment buildings. Now, those apartment buildings, we're zooming into them now, those apartment buildings are occupied by Iraqi government officials, members of the Ba'ath Party, and that is quite an extensive area of apartment buildings. Difficult to say exactly where this explosion happened, but it does appear to be centered there. We have also seen on Iraqi television today President Saddam Hussein meeting with his cabinet. Now, the pictures are quite interesting because maybe they tell a story here in themselves. Many members of the cabinet here are dressed in perhaps slightly lighter clothes, shirts open at the top. President Saddam Hussein is dressed very warmly, almost in very bulky clothing. Now, we know that in the last few days, a cold snap swept through the area. Perhaps he was dressed to keep warm. He did appear to be looking very, very serious. He may, of course, under that heavy greatcoat have had some perhaps body armor. We certainly haven't seen him wearing that type of protection in the past. That's not clear, but it is certainly very noticeable that he is very heavily dressed up in this situation here. We've also heard from Vice President Taha Yassin Ramadan. He has condemned the UN Security Council's move to extend Iraq's oil for food program. He said Iraqis don't need the additional food. He said that this is a blow against Iraq's sovereignty. It undermines the authority of the leadership in Iraq, and Iraq rejects this extension of the oil for food program. And he also
troops, take off your military analyst hat.
Right. Okay, Bill.
As a human, you know, what goes through your mind when you're shot at and when you're shooting at people? What happens?
Well, it's a very different experience, to say the least. It's an intense experience, and it affects everyone differently. And I think that's what's important to remember. But it is it can affect you at an emotional level as well as an intellectual level. And in many cases, Bill, you don't know that you've been affected until months or sometimes even years later. You could see some of those gentlemen that you were working with clearly have not been able to put down some of the experiences they have. Others have a different war. Everyone has a different war, and in those cases they're not as deeply affected. But nobody comes out unchanged.
Infantry Division, the 2nd Brigade, which is the sister brigade to the 1st Brigade, which found itself under attack by that suicide bomber. I have to tell you that this is a determined lot of soldiers. They know that this is the price that their comrades, and fortunately none of the individuals in this unit, simply by luck or fate or whatever, have been injured or killed thus far, but they know that that fate might await some of them, and so it clearly does impact morale.
I recommend you guys rehearse.
Their main focus is on redrawing their battle plans for the attack that's still to come against the Republican Guard forces.
Continue fire, Suarez!
They've been here 5 days now in this sort of indefinite hold, but they're trying to take advantage of that in 2 ways. Number one, they recognize that the Iraqis, in trying to anticipate what route or routes the Americans might take, have repositioned some of their Republican Guard forces because the Americans can see the skies a lot better with their air cover, their satellites, their informants on the ground. They're trying to take advantage of those Iraqi moves by redrawing their own battle plans. For now, I'm David Bloom with the U.S. Army's 3rd Infantry Division in south-central Iraq.
In Kifl, south of Karbala. Today, an airborne assault. Soldiers from the 101st Airborne Strike Brigade took over this town, relieving tanks and armored personnel carriers from the 3rd Mechanized Infantry. The town has been the scene of heavy fighting, partly because of its key bridges over the Euphrates River. Trucks and cars overturned, burned out. They litter the streets. Fired upon by U.S. forces when they tried to charge American Army checkpoints.
U.S. forces now being told to fire on any vehicle that even looks like it won't stop at an American checkpoint. In the last 3 days, according to commanders, 1,200 Iraqis in this area have been killed trying to run checkpoints manned by tanks and armored personnel carriers.
Colonel Joe Anderson claims members of the Iraqi regime forced some residents to attack American soldiers under threat of death.
A, it appears through coercion is how they're making them do that, and then B, through threats of violence or force to say, do this for us or die.
The fighting continued today. At this Army post, 4 mortars exploding 200 feet away from us, a close call. The decision is made to relocate down the road. As we do, sniper fire.
Okay, we've just had shots fired in our direction from over the berm, just in between those buildings.
The gunman disappears. Only a few residents walk the street. Tonight, more mortars and gunfire echo across this town as U.S. forces tighten their grip on Kifl. Dana Lewis, NBC News in central Iraq.
Near the Iraqi city of Diwaniyah today, a rare glimpse of a battlefield memorial service, the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, honoring 2 fallen brethren. Petty Officer 3rd Class Michael Johnson of Little Rock, Arkansas, was killed in action early this week during an ambush by Iraqi forces. A Navy corpsman, he served this Marine battalion as a medic, known to the troops as Doc Johnson.
He was a fantastic man. I know it sounds like a cliche, but he really, truly was.
Marine Corps Major Kevin Nave of Oceanside, California, was also killed this week in a tragic accident in our camp. Nave served as liaison to our NBC News team. Battalion Commander Carl Mundy says Nave was the glue that held his Marines together.
Well, they use the term right-hand man. Kevin was right, left, 2 feet, 2 legs. He was sometimes the brain, too.
Lieutenant Colonel Mundy said that Major Nave died doing what he loved, being out here with other Marines, fighting a war he believed in. He also said that what Major Nave would have wanted now is for his battalion to move on. In recent days of intense combat, the men of the 3rd Battalion rarely showed emotion over their losses. In war, they said, there is little time to mourn, the battle taking all of their strength.
Our heart is heavy. The loss is real.
Today, with a lull in the fighting, these Marines took a short break from war and gave themselves a chance to grieve. Chip Reed, NBC News, with the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines in south-central Iraq.
Aircraft on board. We think that we're a bit grainy, the picture, so it's a bit difficult, unless, of course, you're very good at aircraft recognition to tell us what it is we're looking at.
The technocrat side that is so criticised in some of the papers at the moment comes out. That's an S-3B Viking, which was originally built as an anti-submarine aircraft and very much designed for the Cold War Battle of the Atlantic, and has now become a more general-purpose surveillance aircraft and support aircraft. And it's quite large for a carrier-based aircraft, and then therefore you can put lots of different things in it and multi-role it, as they say.
So are we saying this is not necessarily an attack aircraft, but this is something that's perhaps going to go out on a reconnaissance?
Indeed, or to look at something. Now, if you look behind it, there's a blast shield up to shield the deck. I mean, an aircraft at full power on the catapult has a blast effect about 650 feet behind it, which on a flight deck of that length, it's about 800 feet behind the aft end of the catapult, would be deadly. Behind it, that's an FA-18 Hornet. That is a strike aircraft. You always put up a search and rescue helicopter when you start flying operations to recover pilots from the sea in case they have to ditch early on. And there's what looks like a dance going on, and especially with the graininess of this, it looks more like a dance. But it's a very carefully choreographed activity, launching and recovering aircraft. And there are lots of people doing lots of things. Everybody has to do everything on cue, accurately, properly. Otherwise, the most terrible accidents can occur very quickly.
But that helicopter would always be there, would it,
Yes.
when anything is taking off?
Yes, it would.
Just in case there's an accident when it's going.
They say the flight deck of an aircraft carrier is the most dangerous place in the world, and if you look at the forces and the energy involved, the number of people, the number of aircraft, it's hardly surprising.
Well, there we go, the helicopter there sitting, waiting no doubt for the reconnaissance aircraft to take off, and those are shots that are coming to you live from the deck of a United States, an American aircraft carrier.
The other two are in down the middle, what's called the waist, halfway back from the bows. But you can't fire, you can only fire one of each pair of catapults at a time, but they can fire in rapid succession. So in theory, they can launch 4 aircraft a minute.
Well, we've been watching, I suppose, while we've been watching this, at least, 6, maybe 8 aircraft have gone off.
Yeah.
You think that's an indication that there's a major strike going on somewhere?
Well, not major, but I mean, we've had days with 1,500 sorties a day, so this will be the routine days flying. The carriers usually work in pairs. One will do the night flying and the other will do the day flying. And while one carrier has either its day or night off, it'll replenish and people will get a bit of sleep and so on.
Michael, before we'll continue watching these pictures, but while we do so, I do have to ask you about this report coming out from Number 10 that Saddam Hussein has sacked his air defense commander because there's a very strong suspicion that the 2 bombs that we saw that landed on those crowded marketplaces in Baghdad were actually Iraqi missiles rather than Allies missiles. What sort of credence do you give to that report?
None whatsoever. It's pure spin. And I say that because if we examine the claim, it is this. Saddam has seen missiles landing on his civil population. It has stiffened resolve in Iraq. It has brought Arab opinion behind him. So it is very unlikely that he would sack his air defense chief for that reason and thereby admit responsibility.
Infantry Division is once again getting ready to go on the move here in south central Iraq. If I can ask my photographer Craig White to pan forward here and bear with us because our camera's going a little bit haywire this morning, but this force has been stopped in the desert here in south central Iraq essentially for the past 5 days or so, but now you can see that they're lined up. We've moved a little bit this morning and they anticipate moving some more. Their ultimate objective in the coming days will be to take on the Republican Guard forces, Iraq's tank brigades and heavily armored forces to the south of Baghdad. But for the time being, they're basically just reconnoitering with their other forces from the U.S. Army's 3rd Infantry Division as they prepare to once again move north toward Baghdad.
Of course, the B-52 bombers playing a crucial role to date in this campaign. So there are the pictures live from RAF Fairford, the US base in Gloucestershire. These are pictures live.
As the Iraqis torch oil trenches around its edge. And today, a change in the direction of human traffic. There's still some looking to leave the city, possessions in hand as they look for a safe place to stay. But at this British Army checkpoint, cars and trucks queue patiently to be vetted going back into the centre.
Well, despite the war and the fact that the city is pretty much under siege, there's a real free market economy developing here in Basra. Tomatoes, it seems, a big business.
The fruit is grown in Al-Zubayr, just outside Basra. Farmers and traders are looking to profit from food shortages in Iraq's second city. Vehicles and people are checked by soldiers looking for weapons and ammunition. But they can't be sure that rocket-propelled grenade launchers and guns aren't being hidden under the sea of red.
We try and search, obviously, as thoroughly as possible, and there's, hope that we catch everything that goes through. I mean, I couldn't tell we get everything. I mean, it'd be silly to say that we do.
For now, the desert rats will stay at the city limits. Overnight, more artillery destroyed Iraqi positions. Gradually, we're told, the enemy is being worn down inside, although it may still be too dangerous for British soldiers to enter. Richard Gaisford on the edge of Basra.
Despite signs of movement towards the Iraqi capital, some US troops apparently say they've been told to pause the land advance for several weeks. US soldiers are said to be digging in while the aerial bombardment continues.
With the outcome never in doubt, we can afford to take our time and set the conditions on the battlefield, whether that battlefield is the Republican Guard divisions now arrayed south of Baghdad, or whether those conditions are in Baghdad proper. We're going to be able to take the time we need to set the conditions.
It could point to a rift at the top. The US Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld has come under pressure after he rejected advice from Pentagon planners that substantially more troops and armour will be needed to fight the war. Meanwhile, British troops have surrounded Iraq's second city, Basra, in the south, hoping it can be taken without street-to-street fighting. The latest threat is militia dressed as civilians, and they've established checkpoints to